Hey guys, it's me, Liv. So today I'm going to be playing with one of my embossing folders and using some of the embossing powders from Brutus Monroe to create a mixed media tag. So there's going to be lots of different elements here, but primarily I'm using a combination of embossing powders, dyes, and as well as adding a little bit of the Chroma Mist sprays that Brutus Monroe sells. So first up, I've already gone ahead and put this through a embossing folder that I had in my stash. I'm not even really sure of the name because I am pretty bad at not marking down the names on the companies of exactly who I am. But what I'm doing is, because of the raised areas that you see in this impression, I'm going to take my embossing ink and pretty much wipe it all over the images. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to go ahead and start taking out my embossing powders, and they're primarily going to stick to the raised areas. Now, they may actually fall into the small areas as well, but actually that's okay because remember, it is a mixed media piece, so at the end, all the different variations and inconsistencies kind of is what makes it pretty cool. So the first color I'm using here is Brutus Monroe's Gilded color, so it is meant to be a goldish but not a bright gold color, but definitely gives off that gold look. Next, I'm going to take out the silver one that I have here from Brutus Monroe and add it to the rest of the card so that I can get that silver color to really hold on to the raised parts as you saw me do earlier. Once I have all that, it's time to start using my heat gun and get it ready to go. Now, if you're someone who's somewhat of a perfectionist and you want just the areas that you used, you may actually want to try this a little bit different, in which you use the embossing ink on the embossing folder first, then go ahead and emboss it, which would make it cling a little bit better if that's something that you're looking for. Again, I'm not actually looking for that look because this is a mixed media piece. And one of the things that draws me to mixed media is the fact that it is a control type of chaos that you're working with. So you keep things within a certain parameters, not to get too messy, but you actually don't mind a little bit of mess because it creates something pretty unique. So as you see, you can see how these colors are changing. I just love when using embossing powders and watch it switch over from the powder. So now that I have this all set, it's time to move on to the next part of the project. Now, I really didn't actually use white because that's not a color that I primarily use. I figured I'm going to go ahead and take out my distress inks and start just inking over it. And as you can see, it really hides these areas that you saw before and actually makes them kind of purposely stand out and mix here. The first color I'm using is Prized Ribbon. Then I'm going to come in with a Welted Violet and then finish off again with a slightly lighter blue color just to try to get some different depth with the color shades. Now that this beautiful front is pretty much all done, you could, if you're a card maker, leave it like that. Since that is not my purpose here and I'm creating a tag, it is time for me to actually cut it apart. So I'm going to take out some hexagon dies that I have in my stash. These would be focal. Now with the shapes all cut out, I'm going to go ahead and take this tag. I am using a very large embossing ink pad that I have. This is a Versamark one because I'm actually going to ink cover the entire front of the tags with embossing powder. Now I'm actually using the same exact colors you saw me use in the beginning. So this is Gilded. I'm actually just going to take it and put it right on the front side of the card. I'm using a generous amount because I do want it to be full coverage when I am done, as much as possible. And you're going to see, if you decide to use embossing powders like this is a really quick and easy way to make a grungy background if that is something that you enjoy doing. So let me go ahead and take out the silver one that I was working with before. It's called Sterling, if you're wondering the exact name. And I'm going to go ahead and fill in those two areas and gaps that I have. So now that I have those, I will put them back on my paper, clean up my mess, and it's time for us to heat it all up. So for me, I didn't want it to be super thick, but for people who actually do like their projects to be pretty thick, you could actually then re-ink this whole thing and then put the ultra thick embossing powder clear, and it would really give it a whole nother layer of depth if you're wondering onto your project. So this is just an idea for anyone who likes that kind of style, but you can already see how metallic this all looks when it is all heated up, which is really the effect that I'm going with here. And I just really love how it creates this really cool, and because I also sprinkled it on and did this various stamping with the Versa ink all over it, it's also a little imperfect, which is perfectly fine because that's kind of looking for that look when it helps age it without me even really trying it too much. Now, in a project like this, I always like to ink my sides. I'm taking out that same wilted violet that I had already used. It helps bring in that color. This may seem like it's super subtle, but you will see it does actually help in your project. All these little subtle techniques that you use and these color depths, because it will eventually end up shining through on your project. The other thing that I'm going to do is take out my Chroma Mist, and I'm using the blue violet, and I actually am going to spray it on here because it's already heat embossed. It kind of resists it, but not completely, and I really like the way it creates the splatter effect here. So all I'm going to do is just take out my heat gun and go ahead and dry it off. And it kind of leaves this really cool speckled look throughout. I'm letting it drip, I'm letting it drag, and kind of do what it's doing throughout the project. And to me, it would work because it kind of creates even more of a grunge than we had before. And the heat gun, as you can see, does really well on going ahead and getting these areas set. So now I finally got it all dried, and now I'm going to actually go ahead and use some of my gilded waxes here. I wanted to bring that bluish color that you see in the original when I was doing my distress ink into the card as well, just making sure everything's nice and dry. I initially really didn't want to get my fingers too dirty, but it just really wasn't working the way that I wanted to, using some type of brush to try to get along the edges. So I eventually did decide to go ahead and get my fingers a little bit dirty with getting these waxes moved around. But one thing I do love about the waxes, again, resisting against the emboss, is it just creates another whole layer of textures that wasn't there originally. So just dab it wherever you'd want, wherever spots of color you want to bring out a little bit more, and it kind of pulls those colors from the initial hexagons that you did in the beginning into it. Now it's time to go ahead and do just a little bit of stamping. I pulled out a stamp from my stash. Go ahead, and I just like those little accents of black, putting it randomly throughout the background. I'm actually not trying to make a solid impression. This is all to just bring additional texture into your card. If you are new to mixed media, that's all you want. All of it's about layers of texture. It doesn't actually need to be thick layers. It's just the multitude of them all kind of pull it all together. Going again back in with my Chroma Mist. I'm actually using the white one because everyone knows I love white splatters on my project. Now that I have that, again, use the heat gun just like you did in the beginning when I initially used that purple, just to kind of get it all to set. I do like the fact that the Chroma Mist do sit on top like they do, which is just really kind of cool when you're working with different types of media. And one thing that I decided to do here was actually to dab it a little bit with a napkin. Helps it kind of splatter even more. Now let's try to figure out exactly where I want all these pieces to lay. Now I'm just going to go ahead and start gluing my pieces down. For this one, I am just using my art glitter glue, and I'm going to actually use some foam tape to add some dimension to different ones of the hexagons, depending on the size of them and the layering that I do. Now, one of the things I found is that for some of them, I thought they were just a little bit too bright, so I did go back in and do just a little bit more of my stenciling, and as well as my inking, just to kind of bring in and dull down the color a little bit. So you're going to see I do that to most of my pieces, and I think it helps create a little bit more balance in the colors that I'm working with. Now, using foam tape if you have it, or if you don't have that, you can even just use paper and kind of build it on top of each other just to create that depth. When you're working with it, I just happen to have tons of rolls of foam tape. Now I'm going to go ahead and glue the rest of them down so that I'm ready to start and finish off this project. And one thing I love is that you can really see how the embossing powder has really brighten up those areas of the folder that I had used earlier. I did not actually mount this on any cardstock. Like I usually use cardboard leftover or cardstock really to help it from warping a little bit too much. I'll do that later because I'm not too worried about that now. And then you could just go ahead and glue things down randomly. I kind of like to keep things in 3. Sometimes I go for 4s depending on my arrangement. You know, I think the eye tends to like those numbers. And again, replicating the pattern that you see on top of some being popped up and some being not. The one thing I did want to show you is with this little one, to create more height, I ended up actually putting 2 layers of foam tape on top of each other. So that even brought it higher than the other pieces that I was working with. So just a quick idea for anyone who's working out there. Then I'm going to just finish it off with some of the detailed dots that you get from Brutus Monroe as well. Now these actually have a slight purple tint. You can't really tell behind this background, but it actually works really well. I just used my art glitter glue to put these down. And what you would find with the art glitter glue is that because of the way it dries completely clear. So while it seems white when I glue it down, and you see that when I put it down, do not worry, it will go away once it finishes drying. I'm going to show you an example from another card that I did and that actually uses these dots as well. And you can see when they're fully dry, nothing is going to come through on them. But I'm going to add some of my Nouveau drops here first, just to add a little bit more dimension. Just scattered around. Again, no rhyme or reason, whatever kind of works for you and your taste. Sometimes I do 3s, 1, you know, sometimes by itself. Depends on exactly where I think it could use just a little bit more dots. And now my tag is pretty much done. Oh, I forgot to show you. So this is what it looks like when it's completely clear. You won't see it once it's all dry. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this mixed media video, and I will see you